And if and if a boss is way too hard, trust me, we instantly know it's way too hard. Having 10,000 posts and like.
Okay, so this is pre-raid, but I'm sure there'll be some interesting questions. We'll skip through any that are not relevant. All right, tuning goal for the vault.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. In regard to the raid itself, what would you say, the goal of the tuning in week 1 of the race of all first here?
Dude, he's got a pretty cool background. He's got the helm. Oh, I bought this helm, by the way. I don't remember how much it cost, but it was definitely a pretty penny, and it got delivered to my Dallas apartment because I forgot to update my address when I moved. So that is there. So whoever lives in that apartment has gotten this Helm of Domination thing and has gotten like 3 or 4 shipments of 100 Thieves merch.
Obviously, we have Christmas coming up soon. You've released the Arithmetic Plus and everything at the same time. What would you say is like the goal of the tuning for this first week of the raid? What are you kind of expecting?
Right, totally. So, I mean, I assume you're talking about Mythic difficulty?
Yes, what is exactly, the tuning? Yeah. What's the tuning target?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine, like with most raids, or at least the hope is that, some of those initial bosses won't hold up too much of a fight, especially for some of the top rating guilds. But as you get deeper into the raid, that's where we really start to look at kind of those big bumps in the road and some of those, more mid-tier in the raid instance blockers, essentially, that really start to take a lot more attempts to start to push through it. So, we imagine the first
very basic
at least
answer.
half of the raid probably won't put up too much of a fight.
That was exactly right. That was exactly right. The first half of the raid is Aranog, Council, Taros, and Senarth, and those 4 bosses died instantly on Mythic with basically like 25 less eye levels than you'll have in this patch, if not more. And he said the first half should be easy and the back half should be hard. If you're speaking of the back 4 bosses outside of Broodkeeper, every single one of them had to be nerfed by 15 to 50% to be killable. So yeah, you could say that it was a direct ramp up in difficulty. Literal almost one-shots to all of them were unkillable until massively nerfed, including Razageth in every single phase.
Even within a raid itself, in terms of, where the target audience for certain bosses might be, or what the expectation might be for how long they last. But certainly in that first week, hopefully in that first week, people also, I would say, are able to get to Razagath, right? Like we want to see people progressing there. And like you said,
when were we on Razagath? Was it Saturday? Friday? Saturday? Sunday? Saturday. I'm pretty sure it was Saturday. On Tuesday, we did splits. On Wednesday, we did splits. On Thursday, we woke up, killed 1 heroic Razagath, and then started Mythic. On the first day of Mythic, we killed Dathia and progressed Kurog. They finally nerfed Dathia, and then we killed Dathia. We do a bunch of unnerfed Kurog. Next day, they nerf Kurog. We kill Kurog. We spend time on Broodkeeper. That's Friday. And then Saturday morning, we killed Broodkeeper. It was Saturday.
Obviously, we hope everything is cleared by the holidays, because that is definitely something that we're keeping a close eye on. I've heard people joke that they'll go in there and like death touch it themselves if they have to, which obviously we wouldn't do. But we're definitely keeping an eye on the holidays.
So possibly some week 1 clear is being predicted here.
I will never say never. That has happened in the past, but ultimately we really, success to us is that people have.
That's brutal to listen to.
Fun, not only the high end, but also across all difficulties. We really.
That's all right. Yeah, that's almost Shadow Realm. But I will say one thing while they're on the topic of tuning, is that I've noticed something so weird in the last 2 raids than any raid previously. Okay, outside of Eternal Palace, Uldir, Battle of Dazar'alor, Nyalotha, Castle Nathria, and Sanctum. Those 5 raids. The exceptions being Vault, Sepulchre, and Eternal Palace. Okay, so there's 8 raids. 5 of them were what I'm going to say in a second, and 3 of them all had this issue. And I don't know why one happens and the other doesn't. When we entered Castle Nathria, every boss was tuned really well, and it was killable with minor changes, including Sire Denathrius from this day we stepped in the raid. In Sanctum, every single one of those bosses was killable from the day you stepped in the raid. Some of them were like too easy near the end, but like it was all killable. There's now this growing trend 2 raids in a row where it seems like Blizzard either is just way off on tuning. That's like the logical thing in my head, is they're just way, way off on tuning. But it almost seems like they're gatekeeping on purpose. Like they don't want to go to sleep and have like one of these phases become too easy and then buff it after it's already been cleared. So they like make it intentionally way too hard just to see how close you can get to it, and then they nerf it. This happened on Dathia. Dathia was unbelievably overtuned, and we spent a ton of time on it. And then they nerfed the out of that fight, right? And then you get to Kurog, and then it's the same thing. And they nerf the out of it, and you kill it. Broodkeeper was actually really well tuned. And then you get to Razageth, and every single phase is like a roadblock that needs to be nerfed. Every single phase was nerfed by like a mass. It doesn't even like, I just don't know why they do this. It doesn't even feel like, it honestly doesn't even feel like progression. It doesn't feel like a natural state of progression. Like you can go on the raid and every day you have a goal, that goal is attainable, and you just progress to that goal linearly. It's like this weird start and stop thing. And I don't know if they've just got really, really worse at tuning the raid, or if they're doing this on purpose. That's a question I want to ask, because I think it's a legitimate question. Like during this raid, Razageth's phases were all massively buffed while we were killing Dathia and Kurog. And then they were nerfed back to the form that they were pre-buff once we got to Razageth and progressed on it for a bit. That seems intentional, right? Like it seems like they did that on purpose so you don't just like blow through the fight. It makes the Race World First more fun to do this, the buffing and nerfing thing? No, it doesn't. Some of the best races ever have been almost zero changes, completely linear, tuned correctly from the start. Those are not any less fun. It's weird for everyone involved. It's weird for both guilds. It's weird. Like the best way to describe it is it doesn't really even feel like progression. It just feels like this weird anomaly of like starting and stopping and waiting, and then like they have to decide when to nerf things. It's like you can solve all those problems by just making the raid not need to be tuned like that all the time. And they've done it correctly in the past. Literally 5 out of the last 8 raids have been tuned really well, and you've had linear difficulty throughout all of it. And then the last 2 and Eternal Palace had major pitfalls that had to be fixed. But even Eternal Palace was basically just Ashara. It's actually just the last 2 raids where it seems like they intentionally make it impossible on multiple bosses, 4 to 5 occurrences per raid, where they make it impossible on purpose just to find out exactly how strong you are and nerf it exactly to that point. But it's so weird to do that, and it seems unnecessary. So that's my only take on that.
I want to make sure we're keeping an eye on, those friends and family raiders who are just trying to kill a couple bosses in normal mode, as well as all the way up to the top where people are pushing for world first there.
100%. That will be me these days after retiring from the raid luster. I'm excited to get in there and do some heroic and normal, probably in between the race to world first for sure.
There we go.
Making the game more accessible to people is definitely a great goal for sure. I think the launch of the expansion so far has been absolutely amazing. Like
True. I'm loving the game right now, and it seems like both viewership and like player base seems like the game is very, very, very well liked right now, and I would say that is definitely deserved. There's a lot of very good things here.
Really enjoyed Dragonflight. I've been playing the game for since release 2005, right? And I would say this expansion, it's something different. I think so. It's been amazing. So great job to you and the team on that one for sure.
Awesome, I appreciate it. Yeah, you've been doing like any of those like public events, like doing any fishing?
Yes,
actually, yeah.
That's awesome.
You mentioned, you obviously spoke about the difficulty with Razageth and...
Sorry, this is just things that I notice. This was their clickbait faces.
Yes.
Like Kexman and Sko's clickbait faces happened right here during this laugh, and now we have to find out when Morgan does his pose.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You mentioned, you obviously spoke about the difficulty with Razageth and Mythic, and that kind of ties in with one of the changes we've seen recently with, BOEs actually being BOP in the Mythic difficulty. When you spoke about Vault of Incarnates in the first place, you mentioned the slight change in the ideas behind BOEs in lieutenants around the raid, and
I think that's universally liked, right? Mythic BOEs not actually being BOEs for the first couple weeks, but just being BOP in the raid. I think that is like, I don't know who that's bad for. That's good for everyone. All good.
those are the ones that are going to drop the BOEs. Is that something you folks are still going with Volt? Is it a guaranteed BOE off these lieutenants, or is it more of this is where your chance is every week?
Right. So we've actually had to adjust that a little bit. To your point, though, yes, the BOEs will be BOP for at least the first couple weeks on Mythic difficulty. And in terms of lieutenants, we ended up having to pull back a bit on that. You know, lieutenants will still be rewarding and valuable, and we'll have an opportunity to drop BOEs, but they won't be the only thing in the raid that can drop that.
We figured this out during the raid.
You know, when you see people death skipping trash and just like, you know, running to the boss and face planning, when we look at that,
another good take.
Really what that says to us is, well, we need to make it more rewarding to actually want to kill the trash, right? Like trash serves a lot of different purposes in a raid, from, you know, helping to tell the story of what the heck is going on in this place.
So basically they drop from the BOEs don't just drop from lieutenants, they also drop from trash. The main reason for this is we don't want you to trash skip and only kill the lieutenants, and that's fine. The only other thing I wanted to mention is they did a pretty good job of that. You clear all the raid and you clear all the trash in this raid and you don't death skip ever. I think that's good. I think building trash that isn't annoying enough where you feel like you need to death skip it for time is very nice. Seems like the trash in this raid is not too terrible, pretty easy to do, not overwhelming, not too much of it to where you're bored or it's annoying. I think they actually did a very good job with trash in this raid, for sure.
Pace out the experience a bit more.
Except for maybe the trash before Niernia is a little psycho.
Is something that we feel really strongly about. So we want to make sure that the trash is rewarding. We still like the idea of, like, you know, incentivizing lieutenants, but only coming from lieutenants is something we had to change a little bit, actually. But that's something that we'll look at again, maybe in the next tier.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of loot, it's one thing that we've kind of been looking at as community, the rare drops. Now, obviously, you're not going to give us the...
By the way, I think these bang. I think the rare drops bang. I think it's fine that there are really powerful items that are less popular, that are like less able to drop. Also, I think a big part of this is because I think these drop from your vault at a higher clip than they drop in the raid. I think in the raid, it is harder to get the rare drop items. I think in your vault, I think the rare drop items are the same likelihood as everything else.
Exact percentage, but
that's tinfoil as fuck, but that's what it seems like.
Is this something that, you know, with these rare drops, it is going to be a big event when one drops it? Are we looking at that sort of level? It's not something you're tuning the game around specifically, such as the bow from Razageth.
Right.
Bow from Razageth,
I mean, like you said,
crazy.
I can't speak to the specific drop rate, although I imagine the community, you know, they're very smart and will very quickly kind of piece that together, I imagine. You know, kind of crowdsource the drop rate after a little bit. But
I've seen the Broodkeeper staff drop every kill of it. Well, the Broodkeeper staff is not a rare item. Neither is the Guzzler. It's the ring.
I will say it's not nearly like as low as, like, you know, the 1% drop rate mounts, right? Like it will be different, but it should be something that you see multiple times within a raid tier, and you can get really excited when that thing comes out. I mean, you mentioned the bow on Razagath, but you know, that's actually something that we've done in the past also, like end bosses in particular, almost
Gavel,
especially in recent history, have had something that's a bit more rare and a bit more exciting, but it was never like...
Were they actually more rare though? Was it ever confirmed that Gavel and Jathis were more rare to find than other items on the boss and rogue daggers? Like, obviously the hunter bow was, but I don't know if those other items were actually more rare.
Clear that was the case, right? You just kind of like learned over time, like, oh, this thing just doesn't drop as much. So we really wanted to increase the clarity there, right? We wanted to get, you know, the ability to say, like, hey, this is a more rare thing, like in the dungeon journal. So with the ability to do that now, we thought, hey, this is a cool opportunity to not just do it on end bosses, but expand that.
Yeah, this is a Skarzar diff, by the way. I think this was his idea. He spoke a lot about it.
Raid. Farming the same boss for a couple weeks, it's really cool and exciting to get something a bit more rare that maybe you've been excited about.
Dude, I wonder how long it's going to take for everyone in your raid group this patch to all get a mythic Whispering Incarnates trinket off of Council.
Out for a little while, and it kind of keeps the value of those bosses even through...
Bro, every time that shit drops in normal,
so,
there's like 30 need rolls.
We're excited to see how it plays out. You know, we'd love to hear feedback on it. It's definitely an experiment. But given that we got the tech essentially to more clearly communicate that, we were excited to experiment.
Awesome. Taking it in a little bit of a different direction. So, Untested bosses going live is pretty popular, I would say, at least from my perspective these days. Do you ever think we'll see a raid go live that's mostly or fully untested by the community?
Mostly or fully what? Sorry.
Untested. The answer to this is no. Like, how can you turn down thousands of people like testing your stuff for you? It's just like infinitely valuable. Plus, a lot of those things change. Like, a lot of the stuff that was wrong this raid had nothing to do with testing. Like, Dathia testing was fine. Kurog testing was fine. The bosses are largely the exact same thing since those tests. It's just tuning. And like, all the tuning that was fucked this raid was done after the fact. In fact, the tuning for Razageth, Kurog, and Dathia was pretty accurate until the buffs they made, like, basically during the raid or right before it. So weird. I keep going back to it. I don't understand. I don't understand. I want to ask them about it, but I also don't want to talk to them about this at all.
Untested by the community, like no PTR.
Oh, that's interesting. PTR. I will say it's possible. Like, I never say never. But our priority, will always be to create the best player experience possible, right? And if we don't feel like we can do that, we won't release the raid fully blind. With that said, I think there is also more that we get out of raid testing than just encounter feedback. Like, there's actually a lot of value that we get out of like class tuning, or
true,
people can test out the set bonuses, and being able to test that in a raid environment is really, really valuable for tuning purposes as well. So
it has to be said, Morgan's shoulders are still looking broad. Yep, dude's got some cannons.
I think it would be awesome.
Dude's got shoulders like the shaman transmogs with the giant fucking cannons on them.
Could be something that the community experiences together. We do think that would be pretty awesome. But ultimately, our focus is on the player experience and making sure that that is as good as it could be. So, as you've seen, we're still kind of testing the waters there and moving in that direction for sure. But
what's the next topic? Are you reliant on community testing?
Like fully untested like that?
That's kind of a good question. Usually their answer is they do most of it internally, but they take account of everything. Let me browse these questions. Do you undertune PTR bosses on purpose? Also a very good question. Every boss this PTR was massively undertuned. We killed every single boss on mythic testing in under an hour. Like, I think the answer is yes, they do, because like they're not trying to challenge you and make you see what the actual like difficulty of the boss is. They want the bosses to be easier so you see the whole fight and can test the whole fight. Like, I think the answer to that's obvious. All right, next one. What's your ideal raid length and difficulty curve? I don't want to listen to that. Raid balance discussion. Cool. How do you feel about recycling boss mechanics? It's a bad... Go skip that. Will we see dragon riding in a boss encounter? We already spoke about that a lot. I think they'll do that. What... Will niche spells like mind control be useful? No. Will the fated system return in Dragonflight? Great question. Will healer trinkets become more desirable? Okay. Specific key level system. Any evoker specific transmog? How much health does Razageth Heroic have? BlizzCon. Okay. So, like, there's like 3 more good questions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would you say that you're still quite reliant then on the community testing that's being done on the PTR and whatnot versus like the internal kind of testing team? Like, how does the internal testing team go about it versus like the community testing? Like, what would you say the main differences are? Would you mainly say it's like on the tuning and like balancing and actually seeing like the players playing them, or what would you say the main differences are?
Right. I mean, like primarily on the PTR, like a thing that we really appreciate is when we get like less tuning, right? Like, because tuning is going to happen, right? Like, we all know that's a thing that's going to happen. And if and if a boss is way too hard, trust me, we instantly know it's way too hard. Trust me, we instantly know it's way too hard. Okay, this is too hard. Like, yep, we know. But something that we do find really valuable is that qualitative feedback of like, hey, this mechanic was just frustrating. Like, it was just a pain in the butt, especially for this spec or this role or something like that. That is always really valuable, and having this massive pool of our awesome community testing that is invaluable to us. Our internal testing, our team does a really fantastic job finding all the bugs and giving us a lot of that qualitative feedback, but the difference in the scale of those two groups is very different. Like however many people are on the PTR versus our internal group. It's a very different scale. So certainly we'll often hear things that are very similar to what we've heard before when we go to the PTR.
Yeah.
But especially like even most recently with the Thundering Affix, right? Like that went through so many iterations just based on community feedback, which was really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the community feedback is always invaluable, and kind of sticking with the community feedback.
Yeah, to be fair, I think really what he's referring to more like heroic stuff. Like, you guys remember Heroic Painsmith week 1? Like, he's basically saying, like, yeah, when you guys are all screaming about something, we hear it. That's fine. It just, yeah, I don't... I need to not listen to Blizzard say anything about tuning for a while. It's going to send me to the fucking Shadow Realm. I got a long stream today.
The idea of testing. One thing that I think you can see sometimes during raid testing is obviously some bosses can end up being... or they can feel as though they are undertuned versus what we can do as players. Now, is that necessarily, is that the case? Is it a case of, okay, you were unexpectedly doing more damage, so we're going to have to change...
Interesting to see if his answer... I mean, I've always suspected that the reason that that Heroic and Mythic PTR beta testing bosses are so easy is so you actually can test every single phase and see all the mechanics.
Values of these bosses, or is it more a case of sometimes you'll do that literally just to get information on abilities so that players can see certain abilities, how they deal with them, and then it enables you to tune it after the fact?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, we do intentionally kind of undertune the health on the PTR, right? Like, seeing the same first 30 seconds of the boss like isn't terribly helpful. We want to see people get through a big chunk of the encounter. So yeah, we definitely do have different tuning targets, especially for some of those initial tests.
It was there.
Terribly helpful.
Okay, I'll rewind it one more time.
For tune it after the fact.
There we go. All right, let's see. Let's see
Yeah,
if you
so
get
actually,
it.
I mean, we do.
Okay, that was close. He did it to the other eye. So here he does it to this. He's like looking up like that.
Intentionally kind of undertune the health on the PTR, right? Like,
You
seeing
think they
same
flipped it?
first 30 seconds
Maybe.
of the boss like isn't
Could be
terribly
mirrored.
helpful. We want to see people get through a big chunk of the encounter. So yeah, we definitely do.
Oh, you're right. It is towards the mic. They did flip it. That was the face. Right here, the mic is next to his right eye, and in this video, the mic is next to his left eye. They flipped it. Good call, Chad. Good call.
tuning
You guys are
targets, especially
smart.
for some of those initial tests when we go to the PTR. With that said, especially with this round of PTR testing with Dragonflight, there were definitely some surprises there, right? Like talents added a lot of power to the players, and it's really hard to grasp, especially some of the interesting interactions that happen, right? Like, hey, when you take this talent and I take this one and that person takes this other one, there's some really fun synergy that happens there, and that definitely led to some pretty wild tuning out the gates on the PTR. That we
Definitely one thing they need to get a hold of is understanding how much classes damage differs from when they are spec'd into AoE and when they're spec'd into single target. It's very different. Some classes can do it better than others, and some classes can do it easier than others. Your class can either swap 0 to 3 talents to get all of your AoE and it be good, and some classes have to change like 10 to 15 talents to go AoE, and then they can't do single target anymore. So that's a problem. And they're going to need to not only fix that for those classes, for sure, or else they'll be deeply unviable for the entire expansion, because all hard raid fights have both. They also need, when tuning, to understand that you can't tune, like use Razageth P1, for example. You can't tune Razageth P1 to be beatable before the 6th wins with single target setups, and then also tune the P1 intermission, entirely cleave and AoE, to be full AoE builds. Almost no class can do them both at the same time. So you have to understand where the balance is there. And they didn't do a very good job with that this raid. The P1 intermission had literally double the health it should have had.
definitely got a bit more of a handle on now. But yeah, that's definitely a thing that we very intentionally look at on the PTR.
Taking this back a little bit back to the race wall first, what would be in your mind like the ideal length of a race wall first? Like, how would you describe like the difficulty?
Interesting to hear his take. I'll answer it beforehand just to see how it lines up, and I won't do it after, so it will be influenced by his answer. I've always said that the best race length is usually like 8 to 9 days. That way there's no like bullshit release reset, like getting a reset early advantage. That means that the raid actually had enough hard bosses to progress through it. And it means that like nothing was like giga overtuned. Like I think Razageth, if it was released the way it was killed, would have probably died on 8 to 9 days. Any raid that's gone that long has felt like a full race. A 6-day race can only happen when almost all of the bosses are complete jokes. When were the last 2 6-day races that happened, right? It was Sanctum and it was Battle of Dazar'alor. Both of those raids, the bosses, especially the bosses leading up to the last boss, left a ton to be desired, and they were basically like complete wastes of bosses. So yeah, whenever it's 6 days, there's way too many bosses that get wasted. And whenever it's longer than 8 or 9 days, usually something is overtuned and unkillable until they nerf it, which is lame. So whenever races end up being around 8 to 9 days is when they do it just right, usually.
Curve in an ideal scenario.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to take a step back here. So something especially with, most recently that we were talking a lot about with Shadowlands and coming into Dragonflight was making sure that the progression not only just is the duration, that we're wanting, which, if it makes it out of the first week, that's awesome. I think if I had to throw an answer out there for something like that, like, hey, making it out of the first week, get some new gear, reprogress and kill it not too long after that first reset, or going into the middle of the next reset or something like that is probably where we look. It depends on the size of the raid though. It depends on a lot of factors there, but something that we really have tried to focus a lot more on is not just that we're hitting, difficulty targets, but also that the progression itself is really exciting, right? Like we got a lot of feedback through Shadowlands that, like this fight was really hard, I hate to throw Stone Legion generals on the bus, but like that fight was really hard, but it was hard in a way that felt frustrating, right? Like the progression didn't feel good. And
correct.
That's an area that we talk a lot about, especially when we're doing some of that early tuning, when we're looking at, maybe we're going to make some changes to a fight that people are actively working on. We always want to make sure that that progression feels really good, that, like something that if you're, maybe consistently, we feel like the group might have mastered the first phase, but then they're only getting into the second phase like 50% of the time.
Yeah.
We'll look at that and be like, well, why is that really inconsistent? Like at this point, we know these groups are so freaking good. That should be 100% rep, right? Like they should be able to get to phase 2 100% of the time. If they're not, there's probably some like really unfair wombo combo or bad timing or like timing that's really inconsistent. So we spent a lot of time talking about that and making sure that the fights feel consistent and they feel really good to progress on, and not just like, oh, well, this is like, certainly, you can get wipe counts up really high by making things inconsistent, but I don't think anyone would enjoy that, right?
Yeah. Okay, so part of me found that fun about Stone Legion. I think Stone Legion was lame for other reasons. First of all, it was just like a meme ad fight. And second of all, you just got through to the last phase and one-shot it. Like, linear difficulty in raids matters, but so does linear difficulty on bosses. So, like having the difficulty be so high and then immediately drop off just feels unnatural. Yeah, Razageth suffers from that issue now, for sure. Razageth is like, P1's really hard. P1 intermission takes a lot of, like, practice to get right. P2 is way easier than that. The P2 intermission is easier than the P1 intermission. And then the last phase is easier than P2 and P1. So, like, the difficulty just ramps down throughout the fight. It's very, I think all bosses like that leave a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an area that we've talked a lot about for Dragonflight.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, this many years designing bosses at this point, you guys must almost have the absolute perfect mix at your disposal. Is it going to be in this way? That's the question.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. Like I was mentioning, some of the first changes that we'll go to make if we think we need to make a change to a boss is, before we even nerf things, we just say like, hey, is there like, something that we can change the timing of to make it more consistent, something that makes it less feel less random, so that this isn't something that they just have to hope it hits the right target, right, to be able to progress past this phase. So there's a lot of different elements to kind of tuning mythic bosses, and that's certainly one of the ones that, especially early on, that's where we go to first before we say like, okay, well, do we actually just need to nerf this thing? As we try to make sure that the progression is consistent and fair.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
That's
for
fair.
Sure.
That's fair. I mean, you mentioned obviously the mix of boss fights. There's been so many over the years, and it's quite nice in Vault of Incarnates from my point of view personally, that you've taken inspiration from the best boss you folks have ever done, which is Lei Shen. Throne of Thunder is the best raid ever. I will not be taking questions. Yeah, but you've obviously, I mean, it's fairly
true.
It's easy to see that Kurog Grim Totem is slightly inspired by Lei Shen,
and what a fucking bastardization of that concept. Kurog Grim Totem, in my opinion, is a complete failure. It had the exact right idea. It is a build-a-boss. You can choose what mechanics you want to deal with when, theoretically, and you can choose what part of the fight is going to be hardest, and they totally fucked it up. The best boss to compare Kurog Grim Totem to is Enerva Darkvein. Enerva Darkvein had these 4 canisters that each, at different levels of empowerment, let certain abilities be harder or amplified in some way. Very much like a Lei Shen kind of thing, except it kind of scaled on its own instead of you choosing where it went, based on boss percent HP. And they gave you this like really cool idea where like, oh, well, you don't want to deal with this mechanic? That's fine. You can like drain this canister. But then on Mythic, they just made it so when you drained one canister, it just went into the others. So there was really no creativity behind it at all. You just single targeted the boss until it died, and like you opened the canister one time at the end to not wipe 2 in an early enrage. And they took a really cool boss design and made it not cool. And they made it all not matter. And Kurog is the exact same thing. They gave you the potential. So there's 2 things about Kurog that I think were massive failures. Number 1, they had the mythic ads have way too much HP, meaning that you never wanted to swap phases, because imagine swapping a phase and not 100 energying a phase. You would just spawn a 60 million health ad. Something they had in the journal for a long time was anytime the boss casts its ultimate ability, which in the fire phase is Searing Carnage, Frost is Absolute Zero, Earth spawns the ads, and Lightning, it's the little lightning strikes you soak. Anytime it does that, it spawns a new ad. It's actually, I don't know if it's still in the journal to this day, but it was right up until the raid came out. If they would have done that and had the ads actually have a killable amount of HP, that would have actually just been a better fight, and it would have allowed you to swap phases. I mean, it would have given you the option to swap phases and not just make it a boring fight where you always are going to skip one entire phase, which is Lightning, which is infinitely harder than the rest of them mechanically, even if you're immuning the lightning crashes. So that's number 1. Number 2, they came up with a last phase. They made it at some point. They called it Stage 3. What happens is the boss no longer is tethered to any totem, and he has the ability to use any of the mechanics of his fight. Searing Carnage, Absolute Zero, Lightning Strikes, and the Earth ads, enveloping, the Earth Dance, the Fire Pools, the Frost dodges, like all of it. He has the ability to cast all of those spells. And instead of making that the last phase, which would have been really cool and like really fucking hard potentially, they just made it an instant enrage and you just die instantly to a stacking dot. I just feel like Kurog was a fine fight on paper, but the potential of that fight and what it ended up being was a complete failure. But interesting to hear what he says about it.
You know, you could argue that Broodmother, slightly inspired by Razorgore way back in Blackwing Lair. Is this something that, you know, you folks could potentially revisit now that there's been enough time? For example, bosses like Hansgar and Franzark and Thogar that you had, you know, in obviously in Warlords of Draenor. Is that something we could see moving forward? Is kind of taking those mechanics that really stick out in players' minds and bringing them up to the more modern era potentially?
Yeah, I mean, like ultimately, every raid tier we're trying to make the next Hans and Franz or the next Thogar, right? Like we're always trying to make that thing that
Two
is
banger
the most
fights.
memorable encounter. And often, yeah, we are inspired by these previous encounters and look to make, you know, like you mentioned the one that was, you know, very clearly inspired by Razorgore, right? Like I think even in one of the first kickoff meetings it was like, hey, what if we did Razorgore but 2022, right? Like like, and you know, how do we want to
what if you put it earlier in the raid and allowed Kurog to be the second to last boss, so it could have been what I was just describing? Man, that would have been cool. But not even gonna hate on Broodkeeper, wasn't even a bad fight. Broodkeeper actually ended up being, if you want to rank it with the meme ad second to last bosses, it is certainly number 1. It's way better than Stone Legion Generals and way better than Kel'Thuzad, for sure.
Creating that. So definitely there's an element of like what's old is new again, but then also, you know, it just depends on who's working on it and what kind of geeks them out and what inspires them. Yeah, those are always fun to explore. And no, I think something that is in common with a lot of those bosses that you mentioned is when the environment is really heavily involved. I always personally am a huge fan of those. And I think Razagath will not disappoint on that front. I'm sure you all have seen her room, even if you haven't had the opportunity to fight her yet. But her room is super epic. There's a bunch of different platforms, and we took we made very good use of that space.
Yeah, I think the usage of the room on Razagath was really good. Like the fucking giant ass chained up Dargans in their little jails. Yeah, I think the room in that boss was really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited to see people get in there. And honestly, like I just like when people used to ask me what I did, like, you know, when I first started on the team, I would just say like I make dragons, right? Because like that was a thing, right? And
I'm sorry, I keep getting distracted because he's wearing HyperX headsets. And I keep remembering that time at Complexity when it was right after we got a real like sponsor and org for the first time, and they were sponsored by HyperX, and I had to use a HyperX headset when I came home because my mic was broken, and I said on stream, "Man, all headset microphones suck," because they do. Like they are all really bad. But I was wearing a HyperX headset when I said it, and I got a nice long talking to about that. And also, interesting little funny part of that as well is the person who was working at Complexity at the time, who was the HyperX partner manager, is my current girlfriend. We were not dating at the time. So that was a nice introduction. But I still pulled it off though. Insane Riz. Back to the video.
It's so fun to be back in an expansion where like that's true. Like we get to make dragons. Like it's so just classic World of Warcraft that
100%.
So geeked out about that again.
Like actually on that note, I was gonna ask, like, how close were you to actually putting maybe like dragon flying in one of the boss encounters in the raid?
They're going to do this. This is going to happen. I'll draw it right now. The third boss of some raid 2 to 3 patches into this expansion is going to have multiple platforms like this. Let's just assume they're like in a line, right? So just ignore this platform entirely. Okay, this platform is gone. Every other platform is what you're doing. P1 you do here, P2 you do here, and P3 you do here. And the boss phases at 66% or 2 minutes into the fight, 4 minutes into the fight, and 6 minutes into the fight, whatever. And then every single time you are changing platforms, you get on your little dragon and you do like a little dragon riding course in between platform 1 and 2. And for every ring you go through, just like a dragon riding race, you get a % damage or haste buff or something, so you don't feel bad for actually doing the flying portion. And then you land on the next platform, pop your cooldowns with a haste buff, and it's just like the super most basic thing ever. Something like this will be done this expansion. You know, you always know it. You knew it with the underwater boss of Blackwater Behemoth. You knew it with at the beginning of last expansion. You absolutely knew they were going to do an anima power boss. They're not gonna be able to help themselves. It will happen. Money back guaranteed.
Well, I mean, there is the like kind of like what do you call it? Like the vehicle kind of flyover at the beginning of the raid, which is kind of neat. I think dragon flying in a raid encounter would be really challenging because like that puts you in combat, right? And like you can't mount while in combat, so we'd have to come up with some solutions there. But I do think, you know, like what we did in Noku Defensive was really cool, right? Like where you get to use
Noku Defensive is a good example because Noku Defensive is like pretty much exactly the dungeon version of this, except you'd have to make it enticing enough, and they'd have to like port you onto a dragon riding mount mid combat, which would be like an interesting thing to code.
Fly around the zone. I do think things in that vein are really awesome and would be really, really cool to explore something like that in a raid for sure, where you just kind of like have a
Noku is based.
And get to fly around.
I like Noku Defensive. I have from the start.
Yeah, I mean, we love dragon riding just as much as the community does. So anytime we have an opportunity to like use that somewhere, like we're all about it. So yeah, during an encounter that would be rough just because combat restrictions, but you know, in the space itself, I think that's totally an option.
I'm trying to remember the last time that there was like anything like that. I'm thinking about maybe like Midos or something back in Battle of the Lich King.
It's
or something.
Is it Malagas?
I think so, yeah.
That's like vehicle combat fight. It's very different.
Absolutely.
This is probably the last good question. Will the fated system return in Dragonflight? The next question is, will healer trinkets? No one cares. Specify key level system, doesn't matter. Voker transmog, how much health? BlizzCon.
Do you think there'll be something like that in Dragonlance, Dragonflight at all?
So we thought it was actually like very successful. Like I think the community really enjoyed it. I would actually love to hear from you all. Like, would you all like to see a season 4 again? Like, were there things about it that if we did do it again?
Yes. The answer to that is yes. And if not, for one reason and one reason only. It is just objectively better than a really, really long last season of the expansion. The last 3 to 4 months of that is miserable. A season 4 at the end, if anything other than just shakes it up and gives you something else to do, even for 2 to 3 weeks. Things that don't matter from season 4, in my opinion. I think the affixes could have not existed and it would have been just as good. I don't know if the affixes are necessary. Also, small side note, don't know if affixes in the entire game, including a Mythic Plus, really make any sense. At least the seasonal ones. I don't know. I just feel like they don't need to be there. It already has difficulty from infinite scaling. All the affixes just seem weird, and in the worst case scenario, they just seem like they make you want to play the game less, and that just can't be good. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that faded affixes mattered. The dungeon pool was like a really cool thing to do. I think the answer is yes. I would say the community, just generally yes. The answer to that is you would want an extra season.
You would want to see changed. I would love to hear from y'all.
I mean, for me, I think it was absolutely fantastic revisiting those raids and getting an idea of, we get to do these raids again, but there's a little added thing that we can do. To me, season 4 felt more like a celebration event than it was a here's something new for you, because obviously we're going through the old raids. It definitely feels like an opportunity for us to enjoy and have something quote unquote fresh to do as we lead into the next.
I mean, yeah, it's like a celebration in the grand scheme of things. You're celebrating the raids that have happened, I suppose. But it's also just one simple thing. Like, playing WoW, if you boil down what you're doing when you're playing WoW, you're like making your guy stronger. You're making your eye level go up. And the dopamine hit of getting a new item drop or a piece of loot feels good. That's a big reason of playing WoW. And that just gave you another opportunity to do that when you were already set max eye level.
Expansion. I think the only thing I would potentially change, and it's kind of something that has been brought up before in the past, the dinar system. Obviously, the dinar system and the ability to upgrade. I'd actually like to see that expand
fucking dinar.
The entirety of an expansion. Maybe not necessarily straight away, but say after 2 months or a month.
Interesting to hear his answer to this about the dinar system, because I asked Morgan about this, and he basically said it would never really make sense. I think he said something along the lines of, like, if you ever really need a vendor for something, there was probably a better solution. Like, a vendor is literally the worst case scenario solution to something you can't find a better solution for. Because you could always just add a vendor and it fixes the problem, but it's boring and there's more intricate solutions. But I wonder what
and a half or however long.
What he says.
Then add the dinar system, so at least there is that bad luck protection. At least it kind of gives you an opportunity. Oh, hey, I'm bringing an ult through. I can get some different gear. So that would be my thing for season 4. But outside of that, I think it was a complete success. I absolutely love season 4.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely an opportunity, like you said, to kind of celebrate, all the content that we had built, and find a way to kind of make it fresh again. And with the dinars, one of the things we talked about is like, well, I already earned a lot of this stuff. Like, re-earning it isn't nearly as exciting, the second or third time, which is, that's another big reason why we really took a hard look at how we were handling our Mythic Plus pool, because it's like, how exciting is it to farm, my IQD for the 3rd season in a row? Like, can I get a different item to farm here? So
yeah, but that's like solved now in Dragonflight. God, I actually love that part of it. I love that, like, the next season's gonna come out. There's gonna be 8 to 10 new dungeons and an entirely new loot pool for Mythic Plus gear, instead of it being just the same thing for 2 years. I think that's certainly just one of the reasons that the Mythic Plus change is so insane.
We wanted to give you an ability to kind of earn one of those things more quickly, but item upgrades and that bad luck protection is definitely something that we've looked at and have expanded quite a bit, right? Like you saw with the Creation Catalyst and Shadowlands, and that came forward, and item upgrades are also something that we're continuously kind of evolving and looking at if there's other places where we'd want to expand those types of systems into. So very cool to hear, and definitely if that's something we do again, I'm sure, much like last time, that's something we'll engage the community on and ask what kind of changes they might want to see.
Yeah, sounds really good. For me, I guess the only important thing there is that it doesn't replace new content that might have come out in its place, if you know what I mean. Because new content for me, at least, is always the most exciting thing with World War.
Yeah, that would be a downside. If creating a season 4, or in this expansion, a season 5 before the new expansion somehow slowed down expansion progression and diverted their attention away from the new expansion, that would be an argument. But Season 4 was largely created and developed by 3 total people instead of like hundreds or thousands. It was a very, very efficient use of those people's time, I'm pretty sure. And they were also working on Dragonflight at the same time.
Work out for sure. So that's obviously like an important balance to strike, I guess. But other than that, yeah, only positive things really. I have a couple of questions here from the raid team. One specifically on healer-specific trinkets. Historically been quite underwhelming compared to generalistic stat-stick options.
We don't need to listen to this.
How would you
end here? So I've got a couple of quick-fire questions for you. Very, very simple. First things first, do we have any plans for allowing players to specify their mythic key level rather than having to keep upgrading it? Is it just, I want to go into this dungeon, I want it this level, let's go?
Yeah, it's like similar to the Diablo 3 keystone system. I mean, this would be a totally, yeah, you can see it in his face. Morgan is not vibing with what he's saying. He looks like he just walked into his house and his dog was shitting on the floor, but like the dog was mid shitting and like wasn't gonna stop. But the dog's looking at him like, you know, he's sad and upset that he's doing it, but he's ashamed, but he's not going to stop. And then he's seeing all this happen in real time. That's the exact face to me. So let's see what his answer is.
Is there any plans for that at all?
Specify their key level. Not currently. You know, we did add the NPC to let you reroll keys recently, as well as more easily de-level them. But ultimately, like, we think the variety is really important for keystones.
What are you guys saying? That's a weird description. Like, have you guys never caught like an animal like pooping in the house once in your entire life? It's happened to me twice, and both times they did that look to me. They were like, I really don't want to be doing this, but I'm not stopping, and they're really sad. I did that too one time. Well, I didn't poop in the house. I was actually in a Taco Bell drive-thru, and for whatever reason, I forgot my wallet, but I already ordered like Taco Bell. This was like 10 years ago. And I started going up through the drive-thru, and then I realized very shortly after that my wallet wasn't there. And for some reason, instead of just going to the window and being like, yo, man, I forgot my wallet, I have to leave, I don't know, I had a fight or flight reaction, and I didn't want to deal with the embarrassment and shame of going through the drive-thru, so I backed out of the drive-thru very awkwardly, and I had to do a few like stops and starts to get out of there. And then I realized as I was doing it that there was a window, and all of the employees were like watching me do this. So like in a way, I was like ashamed looking at them as they were looking at me. And I was also just trying to flee and get out of the drive-thru as soon as possible. So I feel like I had a moment like that of like the dog. And then also what I did is I had another similar experience where I ordered pizza at my apartment. I was literally 19. This like Cataclysm or Mop or something. And my door had like a like glass door like at my apartment, or like you know, like a screen door that you can like see through. And I was sitting there like, so like if you're standing at this door, you can look 10 feet ahead and you see my desk against the wall to the right, and I'm just playing games. Okay, but we were in the middle of like, I think it was Spine of Deathwing progression, which was like a pretty hard boss, and we were mid-pull, and we were like, I don't think we killed it that pull, but we killed like a couple hours later. But we were like mid-pull, and I forgot I ordered food, and this pizza man was just sitting at my thing, and it looked like he had toiled getting up the stairs too. I was like on the 3rd story or something, and I'm just sitting there gaming, and I'm just looking at him in the door as I'm gaming at my computer, right? And like he's like, here, like I have the pizza, like you can see me, like come sign this receipt and like let me leave. And I was like trying like with body language to tell him that like I was in the middle of a pull and I couldn't really get up right now. So I was like doing the pull while also like looking at him and like saying, like mouthing that I was sorry. But then he was like, why are you sorry? Just like fucking come get this pizza. And yeah, it was just another scenario. And that went on for 5 minutes until we wiped, and then I went and paid him and kind of explained it. But I'm sure he was really confused. Anyways, those are my 2 scenarios where I was where I felt like the dog in that description.
Because big thing this expansion.
What is he talking about again? 1 second. Back it up.
Do we have any plans for allowing players to specify their mythic key level rather than having to keep upgrading it? Is it just, I want to go into this dungeon, I want it this level, let's go? Is there any plans for that at all?
Specify their key level. Not currently. You know, we did add the NPC to let you reroll keys recently, as well as more easily de-level them. But ultimately, like, we think the variety is really important for keystones.
Dude, I am hitting Morgan with the most insane clickbait faces. Like, he looks like he's being possessed. Like, at any point I pause, he is looking wild, man. Like, I can't pause it where he's not doing a clickbait face. They're all iconic, dude. He's got a very expressive face. All right, this is a cool interview. We're going back to doing some other shit, though.